Awesome. Hey, friends, it is almost 3:30. Matter of fact, it'll be probably 3:30 in just a minute or two. We'll be starting in just a moment. We threw in the chat just to let everybody know we'll be starting. If you can hear us, I'd love for you to just go ahead and just type in a yes, you can hear us. That would be awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And feel free to tell us where you're from. If you're from a school district in Oregon or from small school, big school, let's go ahead and feel free to go ahead and type that in where you're from. Oh, that would be excellent. Of course, telling us where you're from lets us know that you can hear us. It's kind of like the twofer, right? Awesome. And just to let you know, we are recording now. So I'm going to go ahead and record today's session just to let you know up front. We are doing a live session today. We're also streaming live from YouTube as well. Okay, so we have somebody from Portland Public School. That's exciting. Thank you for being here. We're being here. All right, so Nicole, you can hear us, right? You should be on. Good to go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and quit my email. That's just in my way. I apologize. There we go. Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, friends, welcome. Appreciate you all being here. We have the slides up. Nicole is sharing those slides. And so you want to be the one who just shares from your screen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Fine.
awesome. Awesome. That'll be easier for me. So right now we'll go ahead and I think Nicole has already put in the Padlet as far as our links. So we'll go ahead and put up our first slide. And I think it's just basically, if you've never done a Zoom before, if you've never been here before, you can just throw your questions into the chat. Our goal is to, of course, stop periodically and ask for people to kind of interact and engage with us. Our goal is to not just simply do all the talking. If you are watching us on YouTube, you can also go ahead and chat live in the YouTube as well. With that being said, what's the next slide? Look, it's going. Yeah. So welcome to Emergency Remote Learning. We've had this great conversation, and I, because we've been doing a lot of talking about remote learning and online learning, and it's so different for everybody. Every person is probably going to go ahead and feel some difference between them and their colleague, whether it be next door, same school, or even different districts. And so each person's kind of put their own spin. Some people are calling it distance learning, some people are calling it remote learning, some are calling it online learning. Nicole and I are really strong believers in calling this emergency remote learning or crisis teaching, because you probably didn't spend the beginning of your school year planning for this moment. And so because of that, we are where we're at, and we're trying to react the best we can today, with that being said. So we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Chris Giles. I'm fortunate enough to work with Nicole. I work in the Beaverton School District with Nicole. My job specifically is to support teachers with Canvas implementation in their school district. This is my 4th year. I'm a TOSA, a teacher on special assignment, but I've been a classroom teacher for over 17 years. And that includes 2 years teaching in Brazil as well. So that's me in a nutshell.
Hi, I'm Nicole Carter. My background is predominantly English language arts. I taught for 12 years in the classroom before becoming a TOSA over here in Beaverton. So my background is digital curriculum and helping support K-12 literacy. I love building online content, both for students and for adults. And did you say you were a Canvas administrator? I know we're kind of broadcasting to everybody out there. So we know that not everybody has access to Canvas, but we are going to be talking about different tools and things that we use. And Canvas is the one that we use the most. And just kind of the things that we've noticed as we move forward, the 5 things, they've been our kind of top 5 things. And a lot of that is based on just building digital curriculum, building digital content for both students and adults. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So with that being said, our 5 things that we've been talking about an awful lot, and we've kind of really, we didn't put these out of the air. We didn't certainly just wake up one day and decide, hey, these are 5 elements that should belong in online learning. No, as both Nicole and I have been classroom teachers for quite a long time, a lot of these things were things we naturally would do in the classroom. But in this, new event, crisis teaching, remote online learning, whatever you want to call it, some of that application that we use in the classroom applies here today, but some of that has to be done in an intentional way to make remote learning or emergency remote learning really work successfully. And so those 5 things, as you can see right there in front of your communicating with your students, engaging your students in some type of engagement, whether you want to call it academic engagement only, or you want to engage them in other ways, it's engaging your students and then giving feedback to students, as well as providing office hours and teacher reflection. Now we know that you're like, wait a second, I've never heard of these 5 things. We're not here to tell you that you have to do them or you should be doing them. We just feel like these are 5 elements that if I was starting remote learning today, right this second, and I had to figure out how to do it, it would be a challenge. But if I had some type of framework that would kind of help me decide how I'm going to do these things, like communicate and feedback, that this kind of framework kind of helps me get that mindset set up for this place. So that's kind of the 5. Again, we didn't pull these out of the air. We've actually, both Nicole and I got friends all over the place. We've communicated with a lot of teachers, including teachers in our own school district. And we feel like, you know, if we could boil this down to 5 or 6 things, what are they? And these kept coming up and kept coming up and kept coming up. And so we feel like we want to celebrate and talk about these 5 things.
Perfect.
Yeah. So again, we're kind of like, I mean, if I could ask you all to raise your hand, you probably would. How many of you right now are feeling, you know, either totally comfortable or uncomfortable, or is this challenging to you? I'm sure all of us could raise our hands in any aspect of how we're feeling or how this is happening in our classroom, let alone how our students are feeling. Both Nicole and I are parents. I have 3 kids. Nicole has 1. We both are middle school parents. So we both see the lens of elementary, the middle school, and many of you are at home right now listening to this, which, by the way, thank you for tuning in. You could be parents, or you could be caregivers, or some other responsibility. And so with that being said, our mantra has really become, this is not taking your classroom and just shoving it online. Like, it's just not going to be the case. So what we're doing instead is we're reacting the best we can to crisis teaching, remote emergency learning, however you want to call it. And we're going to hopefully give you some tools today to kind of walk away from, so that if you walk away today, you're like, oh, wait, I could do a few of those things. But I will tell you, our hope also is, in light of what we don't know next year, what if you could take a few things now and actually begin to think about towards next year? So that's kind of our big planning part.
Yeah, we're to a point now where we've all been in this emergency remote learning for how many weeks? 8 weeks or something.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And so I think it's time for us to really start thinking about the reflection process. And I've been using the word transfer. What is going to transfer to next year? What are things we were just talking with some colleagues, some math and science colleagues today, like an hour ago. And one teacher shared a document that she started on things that she was really glad that she did with her students from September to March that set them up really nicely. Things that she wished she would have done, and things that things that she's planning on doing for next year. And then she also did a list of the same categories for herself as a teacher. And I think that's fantastic. I've asked her if I could start to share that out, because I think it's a great list. I haven't gotten her confirmation on that yet, but she's going to be one of our panelists in our webinar tomorrow. And I think that that's what's really important now, is that while it's fresh in our mind, what can we think about transferring to next year? Because we know we can't just go back to what is normal.
Yeah, and I think too,
saying today.
And I think adding to that also is, I don't know about all of you, but there's no manual for this. Like, we're pretty much going to be the trailblazers. Like, if you never wanted to be the pioneer teacher, well, you are. You never wanted to be necessarily the innovative teacher, well, you are, and you are the one who's creating. So some of these elements we talk about today are really going to be impactful, but also creating that manual for yourself on coming up to what's going to happen in the fall is probably a really important component.
All right.
So with that being said, I don't know if it's kind of like that same thing, like, hey, less is more. And we keep hearing that. And just as a side note, as a parent, this has really helped me kind of see this from a perspective that I may not have seen it from if I was not a parent of a child in our own school district. And so when we say less is more, I'm kind of giving you my experience as a parent, not only as a parent, but as a teacher. But basically, that 10-minute lesson that maybe your student could have done in class is now 45 minutes at home. So when we say less is more, it's reasonable to expect what your students could do in class, but it's not really realistic to have the same expectation of what they're doing at home. Because I don't believe there's such a thing as independent work below 6th grade. So that's why we're saying less is more. And we're talking about planning and intentional. And so when we say communicating, engaging, feedback, and office hours, we're talking about how do you intentionally plan for those things. And Nicole, we're not going to read all those, but just, you know, how are you tracking how are you keeping track of students that you've communicated with or that you haven't communicated with?
And I'm curious if
Yeah.
anyone in our audience actually does have that. I know we've been talking across Beaverton's a large district, so talking with lots of different buildings, and they all seem to be coming up with their own version of some sort of Google
Tracking,
Doc,
right?
Google
Yeah.
Form, spreadsheet of some sort to kind of track how they're communicating and reaching out to students. And I'm really interested to see how those end up panning out and what we might have access to, or if there's some sort of template that's been working really well. And then underneath that, communicate. Chris always says, you know, don't ask me to do something online if you haven't asked how I'm doing offline. And so we're going to go into more detail on that communication piece. But what we're finding more and more is that those relationships are so important.
Yeah.
And as we look to the transfer to next year, something we're really concerned about, those relationships. If we aren't, you know, having those opportunities at the beginning of the year face to face, what are we going to be doing to change the narrative? That was something else we've talked about more recently. And then make those connections.
Yeah.
So,
and Tara had mentioned a comment in the chat. Great, tracking students. We're keeping a spreadsheet, but it's cumbersome. And I think, and thank you for sharing. And I think that the big thing is, I don't really necessarily know if there's a perfect solution other than the fact that I think I need to track who I communicate with and who I don't. And so, yeah, those spreadsheets are probably cumbersome, and some are more elaborate than others. But I feel like as a teacher, I need to be doing that. That's one thing I definitely need to be intentionally doing.
And we're hearing from some of our larger schools as well that they have, what was the person today from Aloha High School? What did he call it? His, there's some sort of team of teachers, admin, counselors, and some of their security staff that are like their crisis. What did he say? I'm gonna have to go back.
I don't remember.
Notes.
Yeah, I have to go back to the notes. Yeah.
They're using some sort of Google Doc to kind of reference, you know, kids that just are not engaging, so that, you know, they don't fall through the cracks and someone, you know, doesn't just not check up on them. And then we've got another school that's not using a Google Doc, they're using a Google Form. Same kind of thing, where they're just wanting to make sure that someone is aware and trying to get a hold of those students. Anywho, we'll just keep kind of plugging along, because we could sit here and just kind of chat, I think, Chris, on this one.
Yeah. And with that being said, I'm going to throw in, Nicole, I'm going to put in the chat one more time. It's our Padlet. So if you feel comfortable, just we have a one just says share your resource. So if you've got a Google form that you're like, this is amazing, throw it in there. It should be open for everybody. And please go ahead and feel free to connect. We love to follow people on Twitter and Instagram. So we realize that all these notes are going to have to be someplace. And so Padlet's usually one of our places we put our stuff.
Right. So yeah, if you feel like adding into the chat to answer this question, what's working in terms of communicating and connecting to your students, regardless of platform, you know, regardless of your content area, what's working, what's not working, some of your thoughts on that.
Awesome. I like the question. So Nicole, you're asking everybody to go ahead and put in the chat right now, just an example of what they're doing in their own classroom for their own students. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. We do have some people that are watching live stream, and so I am kind of paying attention to that chat as well. So feel free, those of you that are in the live stream, to jump onto the YouTube chat there as well. But I'm going to go ahead and move to the next and just kind of jump into some of the communication things that we've heard from some of our teachers. In terms of just basic connections, we definitely use email. We've got some teachers that are using, since we do use Canvas as our LMS, we've got some teachers that will use the Canvas inbox. And then again, some teachers that will even use our our student information system, Synergy, to email out. And then Chris, you actually got, for one of your kids, you got a mail, something sent to your fourth grader.
Yep.
In the mail. So we've definitely, and I've talked to a couple of teachers that have written personalized letters. I think my daughter from her art teacher got her sketchbook from art class with a little handwritten note. So any of those things, I think, make those personal connections. In terms of email, we did talk to one teacher that found that she didn't have a ton of time to write to all of her 180 students, but those couple of kids that just were not engaging, she might be writing to one student that was engaging, but then she would blind CC some of those students that weren't, and they felt like they got like a personal email, and she's actually been able to engage a couple of kids by kind of, I hate the phrase killing two birds with one stone, but kind of doing
Yeah.
that idea where she was emailing more than one kid.
I love it. And Kimberly had written down, Kimberly in the chat had written down, like, you know, block teachers are calling students each week using
Love
Google
that.
Voice. Yeah, I love it. And I think when we first started this, and again, this is, we're 10 weeks into this, but when we first started talking about how really our biggest thing was just connecting with those students, and we were like, carrier pigeon, email, snail mail, you name it, however you can communicate with your students, and then also track, like, who did you get a hold of, who did you not? And my big philosophy is, you know, connect with the students however when you can, however platform, whatever you choose, and then hopefully if you can taper that down to maybe one or two different, or one to one specific, like, because the reality is communicating to students in all those ways is probably going to get a bit taxing after a while. So if I can go ahead and taper that down to maybe just email, or I'm just going to use Canvas inbox, or I'm going to use just discussions, is probably one way that I would probably move myself.
And the thing is too, making it personal. We both have read an article, and I think we have it on the Padlet, about humanizing the experience. And so we've seen great responses to teachers that just have a kind of weekly discussion thread that says something like, you know, what are you doing this week? Here's what I'm doing. We were just talking to a 7th grade math teacher today that said he shares a weekly video about the books he's reading and the video games he's playing, and then also shares out an additional video of the content, but it always is the personalized piece first. And that seems to be having great effect. We've seen also some of our schools do digital spirit weeks, where they've posted things on discussion threads in Canvas and had kids respond there, and then they'll share that out through social media, so they're able to grab even more kids that way. I wanted to share too, I'm going to put on the screen, here's an example that I found from someone across the nation, I don't even know, just a quick Google form with a check-in, utilizing some memes to grab the kids' attention. Now, some of the additional questions down here would be something that you maybe ask at the very beginning and then lay off towards the end. I definitely see the idea of temperature checks, that kind of social emotional learning, morning meeting kind of temperature check idea, being really thoughtfully used through Google Forms. But I think that is a huge tool. And then we've also seen some benefits to providing just fun, engaging platforms with like Zoom or Google Meets or whatever platform you're using for that. But walking away from the curriculum and providing safe spaces for students to just see each other.
I think that one of the favorite ones, my favorite ones this past couple of weeks has been what do they call those? A scavenger hunt, where the teacher will ask the students to scatter and literally run somewhere in their house and then come back with that object or that, you know, device or something like that, and then scatter again and come back. And I think what it is, I mean, from my own experience, but I mean, teaching online, you know, our students need to know that we're human. I don't know if any of you back home had this experience, but when I used to go to Walmart or every grocery store, I'd go shopping and it was near the school I taught at, my kids would be like this. This child is walking by and they'd hide. But in reality, they'd all be like, they'd all want me to wave, or they all want to run up to me, or maybe some run away from me. But
or they'd say something to you the next day. Hey, I saw you at Walmart or wherever. Right.
So connecting with their students and telling them, hey, listen, we're human too. Like here's the video games I've been playing. Here's the books I've been reading. Like that is how you have students go ahead and say, okay, this is a real person. This is the person I'm building a relationship with.
Yeah. And I think too, the more we can have them respond with images and videos in a fun setting, then they're more likely to respond that way in actual curriculum components, which we heard a math teacher talking today a little bit about. One transfer for him was getting his students to use more of the video tools to give discussion and show their learning. And I thought that was really great. There was one other thought I had too, in terms of, and I think we kind of talk about this a little bit in student engagement, but when you have these tools like a Zoom meeting or a Google Meets where kids are showing up, but maybe not engaging, or showing up and it's just a black screen, kind of what that does to us personally as teachers. I was talking with another teacher today about how that kind of loses our teacher self of purpose when we can't see the recognition happening, you know, and how do we guide them into that? How do we get their attention for that? So kind of
Ooh.
moving into student engagement.
That's a good title. I like this is probably the one I like to talk about the most, I think.
Yeah. Well, we were having a conversation with a 7th grade teacher, an ELA teacher, and we were talking about student engagement, and she kind of just paused and said, well, what qualifies as high engagement? She
Yeah.
didn't really have an answer, but she was just kind of posing that question for us to all reflect on. And I really, really liked that she did that.
So with that being said, the question is, what kind of engagement are you seeing right now? And just to qualify real quickly, Nicole and I are not like engagement meaning like academic work, just are you connecting? That's it. So if you want to talk about engagement, just meaning I made a connection, that's what you can call it. If you want to call engagement work, that's totally fine. But so just, if you don't mind, just take a few seconds in your own space and just click that button and tell us exactly where you feel like your students have been able to connect, how many, what percentage. Obviously elementary is going to be different than middle school and high school.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think where that teacher ended up going is she asked that question, like what qualifies as high engagement?
Yeah.
She was kind of thinking, I don't know if I've thought about that before, because I'm taking small wins where I can get them, right? Like if I get that one kid to respond that hasn't responded in 2 weeks, that's, high engagement. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting thought to think about. But I also too know I've talked to one of my good friends down in California, and I share this story often because I really like the way she was teacher reflecting. But she was not seeing high engagement with, basically like a read this and respond activity. And then she made the decision to go ahead and do Flipgrid and Wakelet and do these other things that she saw higher engagement in the classroom with her students with. And she went from 20% engagement to this read respond to 75, 80% engagement by doing a different activity. And so I think thinking about our student engagement in different ways is kind of key here.
I think the fact that we have most of the people who've been here today have responded, between 25 to 50% engagement, which, again, if you're talking a class of 30 students, that's 15 students, 50%. But if you're talking 160, 170 plus middle school, high school students, then you're talking 50%. So, and like I said, Cole and I are not here to like call engagement to any type of qualifiers, simply are we connecting? Because the reality is there's a myriad of reasons why our students are or are not connecting or as often as we want them to. And sometimes connections is purely asynchronous too. Like, Nicole had showed a poll earlier, like if you're sending a poll out to students, how are you doing? And they only connect with you in that off time. Well, I think that's pretty fair to call it a connection. I just want to make sure, are you okay? Are things okay? So.
And I'm kind of reminded, we did one of our, top 5 things where we talked with teachers, and do I need to share these results? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Oh, I did. I already did. That's okay.
You did. Okay.
Totally.
Totally I'm like, fine. This is popping up in front of my screen. What I was thinking was, we had this one math teacher last week that was talking very personally about the fact that she had one kid specifically that wasn't engaging. And when she did a little reach out poll, she remembered that they had like a one-time negative interaction in class. And she took it upon herself to apologize to that one kid and say, let's move forward from here. And since then she got better engagement. So that was a very personal experience for her, but kind of, again, relating back to how important those relationships are. Okay. So some things we've kind of already mentioned a little bit that we're seeing grab kids in is doing a little video. They need to see your face. They need to have that humanizing piece come into play. We also keep on stressing less is more. So if you have a 40-minute lecture that you normally would have been doing, it really should be 10 minutes or less. In fact, I was listening to something else. I think you were telling me to listen to the
6 minutes, 9 at the most.
There you go. The Cult of Pedagogy podcast last.
Yeah, the last one talked about specifically about screencasting. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, if you had that 40-minute lecture, it should be 4 parts. It shouldn't be a 40-minute video that you're posting anywhere. So really think about doing creation of your own content so that your face is included and it humanizes the process. And it does not have to be perfect, right? Like, embrace those mistakes. You're not a robot. I like to make those content videos when I'm by myself, because I talk with my hands and I'm using my voice and everything. and I pretend that, right, that my students are in front of me. And I don't like doing that in front of other people necessarily, because I look weird, but I like to make sure that I'm kind of humanizing that aspect of it. So screencasting, making those videos. In Canvas, you've got that nice embedded feature of video creation right there, but it limits you, right, to like 5 minutes or something. So all of that is just really good stuff. And just,
which actually might be good. I was just thinking about that 5-minute limitation might actually be a good idea.
I think so.
Right?
It is.
If
Yeah.
and we're talking the research we have been doing about, what's a max, and there's a ton of research on YouTube that shows you what a normal video length would be watched in this like 6 minutes or less, right? So
right, even though the algorithm pushes you to watch like long.
No, I know, right? Yeah.
So this is just an example, and Chris, tell me if you don't hear the video or audio, because last time we couldn't see that, but this is just a quick little showcase of teachers that use an opening video. It's less than 30 seconds, in fact, to just say, hi, here we are, start here to get going in the module. And I think it's just a great example of what we're talking about.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our homepage. I'm Mike Smitzhammer.
And I'm Tracy Shalin.
Click the Start Here button to go to the first page in our Getting Started module.
This module will get you oriented to our class.
We'll see you there.
Okay, so we don't need to watch the whole thing necessarily, but you do have closed captioning showing up on there. You've got both of their faces, they're introducing themselves, and they're telling students really quickly where to start. All of that is really great stuff, and I would highly, highly recommend it. We've got to start thinking in terms of UDL, right? And being more inclusive in our design of our online content. And I think if you really take the mantra less is more, if you're putting out there less stuff for your students to do, it should give you more time to really think about the student user experience and kind of plan these little tidbits. So you've got lots of options. We personally have MacBooks here in Beaverton, so using the free QuickTime software on our MacBook to make a screencast is nice and easy. Our students have access to WeVideo on their Chromebooks, things like Screencastify, or we've been hearing a lot of people using Loom. Those could potentially work. I personally love Adobe Spark Video.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a great gateway into making videos because you build slide by slide by slide. So there's so many things out there for you to quickly, kind of jump into this learning and create something that you could use. And I wanted to show another example, Chris, which Chris said, oh, I didn't even know Apple Clips did this, but here, this little video I'm going to show you, and I won't show you for very long, is a teacher that just used her smartphone and used Apple Clips. She is a teacher of, what did she do?
She's out of San Diego, and I think she is teaching.
Oh, she does English for speakers of other languages.
Yeah.
And so by using Apple Clips, you easily have access to do a quick transcribe closed caption. This particular video, she starts in her car and then walks to her offices on campus to show her students how to find her, which I think is pretty awesome. But again, just another super quick and easy way for you to utilize video to humanize the experience.
Hi to all my online students. Here we are starting week 2. I just pulled up onto campus and I wanted to tell you everything's live on campus.
Okay. So, I mean, we don't need to go farther into that, but other examples I've seen, teachers going for a walk and doing a video postcard where they just show their face and show where they're on their walk and what they're seeing. I've also seen, and I'll throw those into the chat here in just a minute, but just sharing how you're doing discussions and that sort of thing.
So Nicole, I want to ask a question. So I think what you're saying is, if I'm just putting stuff out there for students to do, it's pretty, what's the word? Maybe the word static, or what's the word? Kind of like, a sterile, I guess is the word, right?
Yeah.
Like there's not a lot of like personalization. Matter of fact, I heard a quote yesterday, fantastic quote, this blended learning or this remote learning doesn't have to be perfect, just has to be personal. And I think by adding that I love that video, the short video of the teachers saying, hey friends, here I am, welcome to week 2. I think the reality is that we want our students to engage in a learning space, whether you're using Google Classroom, Canvas, or something, they need a reason to go there. And I think if we're there showing who we are, I think that was probably way more of a reasoning behind it other than just, here's the assignment, right? So that's my takeaway from what you're showing me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we have a teacher that's going to be on our panel tomorrow that was talking about how she started up a teacher Instagram account.
Oh,
And
wow.
she's
Okay.
now got 1,000 students following her, not just from her own school, from a school across town, where she'll ask simple questions like, hey, I made this background in my Zoom yesterday. Which one do you like, A or B? And by showcasing or asking, did you like what I did yesterday? And then the students are like, no, it didn't really work for me. She's getting feedback from them through Instagram that she said now they feel more comfortable and engaging with the course, but then also getting my feedback to them because they've been able to show me where I've made some missteps. And I thought that was pretty powerful too.
Love
When
it.
she
I
was
love it.
talking about that today. So yeah, it's kind of a change of your mindset. So again, we use Canvas, but in terms of thinking about UDL, terms of thinking about that user experience, there are questions that I'm constantly asking myself as I build content. How do I want the kids to interact with it? How do I want them to show their learning? How do I want them to get feedback? And if the question is, I just want them to get a curated list of materials, then I might be building a page. If I'm wanting them to turn something in where the audience is just me and I want to give them feedback, then I'm building an assignment or a quiz. If I want them to engage in a community and have more feedback, then I'm building, a discussion thread. And we have found, Chris and I have found that using discussion threads, whether you're on Canvas or Schoology or Google Classroom, the discussion thread piece can be extremely powerful and is kind of a game changer if you're using it well.
Yeah, I think if I think of less is more, I think a Google, a Canvas discussion or some type of discussion platform is probably going to be my simplest way to engage my students. And with that being said, I think that, I go back to those 3 words as a teacher: task, purpose, and audience. And I think like we had that less is more. And I think, what is my task? What do I want my students to do? What's the purpose of it? And what the audience is. And that kind of helps me frame how I'm using these. And I love the fact that Nicole's got these on there, like what are pages, what the assignment is. So being specific and being intentional on how we're going to go ahead and do our students, I think that will help. That helps me do less and hopefully get more out of my students.
Well, Chris has led some webinars for parents, and I was sitting in the chat and watching as things were coming in, and overwhelmingly, as well as the survey results from our students, they want consistency. Yeah. So if we can start to build with framing these questions in mind and build with consistency for their experience, I think that's going to be really helpful. So I'm looking at time here, Chris, and so I'm kind of feeling like,
yeah, totally
rushing through a little bit more, but in terms of the less is more, change your mindset, smaller chunks of info, mini lessons should be ruling the day right now. Chris and I talk all the time about that user experience and going screen by screen. For our students, they have touchscreen Chromebooks that are really not that big. I know I've measured my daughters. So we both have really thought about like, okay, this activity you're having them do opens up 5 different tabs on their tiny little screen, and they're supposed to be in between these 2 things. Is that user friendly? So really thinking about the screen by screen play, and then also huge chunks of texts, right? Like take advantage of bullets and numbered lists. On a good day, your students are going to skim content. It's not a good day right now. It's emergency learning. Yeah. Please, please, please take out huge chunks of directions and instead simplify it down, right?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I love it.
And then in terms of thinking about other ways to communicate with your kids, I know I have more content on here that we should probably be sharing into the chat. One thing that I know that someone shared with us recently was that she was trying really, really hard with her office hours to schedule smaller groups into specific time slots. And then as she talked with one of her colleagues, she was going by ability grouping, and one of her colleagues was going by social grouping, and the social grouping was getting more engagement, and students were there, wanted to be there. So I think that that's super interesting, utilizing breakout rooms, utilizing smaller groups, whether that's in Zoom or Google Meets. Smaller group time seems to be working. Someone today said also differentiating how they're providing some of those office hours and ways for kids to reach out.
Yeah, like more personal time versus a whole group time. Yeah, I think, and again, I mean, this depends on what a teacher can do at home, and we don't really know what each
Right.
of you at home have to deal with. So what works for you is going to be what's the best you can do. So,
And then we've got another little Google survey that I'm kind of showing you right now. Now, this came from one of the resources that we shared on the Padlet on humanizing your response to remote learning, but they called Chris pointed out, they called it locally sourced microdata. And I guess the thing to take away from this is that if you're saying, if you ask this one question and you have a student that responds and says, I have 3 siblings at home that I'm also taking care of, when they answer the question, what could interfere with your success in this class? And if you notice that that student, is perhaps like not engaging for a week or two, you have this micro data to then personally send them an email and say, hey, I know you once said that you have to take care of your 3 brothers at home and you didn't participate this week. Is everything going okay? How can I help you? And I think that is really a good use of data and how to engage and check in on your kids. So I don't know if you have anything more to say to that particular piece, Chris.
I was going to say, okay.
Go ahead.
I was going to say recently I had heard an amazing reflection, which is simply this. When you're interacting with strangers, asking somebody for just like, hey, can I borrow something from you? Or can I have instructions or directions on how to find some place? A lot of times those strangers may not respond, but by just adding one extra step, which is simply, hey, how's the weather today? Or just giving them something to engage in. It's just a really threatening kind of thing.
Mhm.
Then more times than not, the stranger that you did not know engaged in you and asking or giving you information or directions, whatever it was. So the whole point, and I like what Nicole says, like, how are you doing? How is your brother doing? And then the student can go, okay, cool, this teacher cares about me, and now I can go ahead and engage. So yeah, love it.
And again, thinking in terms of kind of engagement, and we had another 7th grade team that talked a lot about how they're doing fun only Zoom meetings. And I have a whole list I can put on the Padlet of some of the things that they've already tried and done: Pictionary, charades, Boggle, Mystery in a Bag, Scavenger Hunt that you mentioned, Scattergories. That's one we played just recently that I thought was so good. So kind of engaging in different ways. And then
you're saying have fun then. You're saying it's okay to have fun.
Yeah, definitely.
I love it.
And we had another teacher that brought home a green screen fabric from her classroom. Do you remember this, Chris?
Yes.
And you kept on commenting because she had such a great professional background.
Yeah.
And she was like, yeah, it's just my green screen from the classroom. But she said she had the foresight before everything closed down to walk around the school and take pictures. She took pictures of a classroom, the library, the front of the school, the cafeteria, so that when she does her meeting, she pops in that background. And the kids never know where she's going to be, but it also kind of is this consistency of seeing the school. And I thought that was really brilliant.
That's a fantastic point.
Okay, so we're kind of needing to move on at this point, kind of getting into the nitty gritty last bits and parts. But I forgot to change that. What qualifies as high engagement? We're talking more about feedback, though. So let me get a different slide up here for you. So in the chat, any struggles with getting feedback or providing feedback with students? I just listened, Chris made me listen to the most recent Cult of Pedagogy podcast on flash feedback, which I think we put up on the Padlet.
We did, yeah, we put it in the Padlet, which if you're not a subscriber to, I forget her last name, Jennifer Gonzalez, I think it's her name.
Yeah.
The Cult of Pedagogy, probably one of the more interesting and exciting podcasts I actually like to listen to. 30 minutes, boom, and she gives you some great information. But the last one, flash feedback, it was really, really informative.
I think so. Yeah, nice and good chunks of information in that one.
Yeah. So if you're listening at home, I'd love for you to go ahead and throw in the chat. What's been working. It doesn't have to be a struggle. It could be something that has worked. But if you are like, hey, I've done this 100 times, it's not working. So I'd love for some feedback from you. Speaking of feedback.
Yeah. What we know, though, is that feedback should be quick turnaround. They need to know that information. I had one teacher say, I'm considering feedback could even just be a like on a post, which I think is so true. So if it's timely feedback, it gives them time to improve on their current thing. So that immediate timely feedback is really good. The personalized piece, as you said before, if I personally engage with you, you're more likely to take my feedback.
Yeah, totally.
But we know feedback is an important part of the learning process, the feedback loop. So
Yeah. And Tara had mentioned, she says there's not the normal immediacy unless we're in a video meeting, which I think, Tara, I'd love for you to, if you have a chance, you can expand on that in the chat and just give me a little more information about that. That would be awesome. I think I want to know what you're thinking.
Yeah, I mean, I think as a parent, I know my child did a huge project for science. It took weeks and weeks and weeks. And as soon as she turned it in, it was on body systems for science. And as soon as she turned it in, she got feedback from the teacher. And the feedback was, oh, you forgot. This looks great, but you forgot to answer this important component of the project. Please go back. And so she was able to do that and add that in and get even more feedback from the teacher. So I think those pieces, you know, she's going to work hard on something, giving her an immediate piece back if she turns something in is helpful.
Oh, so Tara has written down, when I assess a student, I can leave feedback in Canvas, but I don't know when or if the student sees it. And I think that's a good point. And that's a challenge too, because you know, for a student, that's, and if I'm thinking how you're thinking about Canvas feedback, that's 2 or 3 clicks to get in. That's totally okay. It's just the way it works. But how do I know they're engaging my feedback is a good question. A lot of times what I've done in my feedback is ask them questions. I might point out a couple things, but most times I really try to ask a question. And that's typically when I get some engagement. The challenge with feedback in an LMS, whether it be Google Classroom or whatever, is do students know how to find the feedback? Right. And that to me is one of the big things is, and again, I go back to this whole, like, if we weren't doing it at the beginning of the year and we're switched to now we're doing it, did I create an environment where my students have that as a normal process? And if it wasn't, then I have to go back to teaching them how to find feedback. So Tara, I appreciate you sharing and keep doing it, because the reality is maybe your students are seeing it. They just need to get in that practice of finding it. I mean, that's
two
possible.
things I'm thinking about right now is that I definitely remember reading an article where they talked about video feedback being more widely received and huge for students than ever before. So I started doing that in the LMS at the time. And then I thought, well, I'm not going to go whole hog on this. I'll do it for just one class. And then I remember talking to that class saying, well, what did you guys think of the video? Did you like the video? Instead of, you know, getting a rubric back with all my comments on it. And the students all said, what video? They had no idea how to go and find it. And so I realized at that point that I had to take time out of, you know, and give them direct instruction on that. And we were just having this conversation with some middle school teachers today, where they talked about, you know, in general, during middle school, we're teaching them about student skills and how to be a student, how to create to-do lists, how to learn. And now you're in this environment where it's like, you need to know how to check your calendar. You need to know how to prioritize your time. You need to know how to email, right? Like teaching students at the secondary level how to advocate for themselves. A big part of that is to be able to go and talk to the teacher face to face. Well, in this instance, you're emailing. And you were saying you had your little fourth grade. I had my fourth grade daughter email her teacher to ask for something, for some help. And we made her do it, because if we do it, we're robbing her of the opportunity to learn how to engage with her teacher in a, but like, quite honestly, a weird setting. I'm sorry. Super weird setting. Where else but now would your fourth grader be really emailing their teacher? And Tara, I really appreciate you sharing in the chat too, because both Nicole and we are all hoping that we go back into the fall. And your response was to get at least some in-person training, which is so funny, because one of the big things we talk about all the time is the transfer, which Nicole has brought up a few times. How are we taking what we're doing now and transferring in the fall? And it was that question, if I knew now in the fall, would I have done things a little bit differently? So hopefully we go into the fall with that perspective. Yeah. We're going to have to kind of breeze through. We're definitely over our 30-minute time here, but I think anytime we're thinking in terms of changing our mindset, you know, longer open-ended projects, student choice, student created work, break out those memes and GIFs. Anytime you're creating content, I'm a big visual person. So I really, really like, you know, using bulleted lists in my things that I'm creating for students and dropping in memes and GIFs because it grabs the kids' attention. As we've talked before, planning, careful planning, really thinking about the feedback that you're giving. This is one of our teachers, Rebecca Larson at Sunset High School. She tweeted this last week about how she uses her teacher iPad to mark up student essays and how helpful that is, and being able to really quickly record off of her iPad, giving both just the handwritten feedback, but as well as a video piece. just regularly providing that feedback if students are actually like doing the content. We don't have much to talk about in terms of office hours, but we definitely have heard that scheduling smaller group time, as I said before, ability group versus social group, and how we've seen engagement rise with social group ability, grouping. Consistency in the synchronous. We had one teacher today say that they've actually provided a set time. I mean, this is not something district-wide we told our teachers to do. I should preface that. But she's like, me and my team, a teacher and I, we provide 2 days a week where we give actual synchronous class direct instruction. And she says she has really high engagement from that they just have built this routine where the student, she's like, they're really boring. She was like actively admitting that they were really boring, but she's like, the kids are coming. So something's happening there.
Yeah,
so I think it's really interesting to kind of think about that. And I've heard from several teachers as well, that when they have students hit a frustration point, or they've had parents kind of negatively respond in emails, that offering that office hour time as a place to connect and get that extra feedback and support has been really good for them. For those of you that joined us before we started, you noticed that I had music playing. So I'm a big proponent of waiting room and music as we get started, because I feel like it sets the tone. So I like to do that. Chris knows, anytime I can, because I hate awkward silence. And then lastly, kind of thinking about teacher reflection, we've kind of been hitting on it this whole time. Because I think, we're pivoting. We're thinking about next year, right?
Yeah, and I think it's fair right now. Like we've mentioned a few times, like there's no manual. I haven't found one yet about how to do this remote learning, crisis learning, remote emergency teaching. So I think we're making the manual, and I think the reflection is a big part of that.
Yeah. And what I've been hearing a lot from teachers, as we've kind of mentioned already, is that the relationship building is key. SEL work, I think, is going to be becoming more and more important. I really like the idea of temperature checks and morning meetings. Those might not be something that we're necessarily doing all the time at secondary. It's definitely done all the time at elementary, but I think that we could learn a thing or two about doing that and having those consistent check-ins. We know we had one teacher that said she was really brokenhearted by having, just a black screen for her office hours. And so as she got feedback from her students, and they said, well, I need a space where I can see, the anime club that I used to see every Wednesday. And so that's not a curricular content space, but we know schools are more than just the curriculum part, right? So how are we providing a kind of safe space for them to socialize with people they might not be just calling actively on the phone every day or something?
I like the term, even like a welcoming climate, or like a like I like this. And SEL, we probably are going to spend a lot of time on that in the next few weeks and months, because if we cannot meet our students face to face in the fall, and I'm hoping we obviously do, I agree with Nicole, it's going to be a massive component of how we're going to do this.
Well, and we've talked about it a lot too as parents, and I have an example I can throw in the chat, but I remember reading a Twitter thread at the very, very beginning of a teacher who had 2 teenage sons, and talking about like her workload to even get the kids set up for success. Yeah. And I know that I've experienced that as I set my child up for the week of activities. Like if I just left her to her own devices to try and navigate what her online environment is, she would miss probably 75% of the content that she's supposed to be doing. And so, my amount of work as a parent to set herself up, and you've talked about that with your wife as well. Chris likes to say all the time, the parents are now the IAs that we never intended to hire. Nope. So I think I think that we've been talking a lot about like, what are we doing to prep parents? And I've actually heard from a couple of kindergarten teachers that said they do Zoom meetings for just the parents to have conversations about child development and what is appropriate and how are we I can't even imagine.
I can't even imagine. I mean, I have a little one, but fortunately my wife is staying home with me, and she's able to take care of it. But I strongly think also part of it is I don't believe there's a lot of independent work below 6th grade. So if you're expecting your 3rd grader or 4th grader to do work on their own at home, and now the state's kind of opened up, and people are going back to work. Hopefully some people are, and hopefully more and more will. Now, who is taking care of that? Who at home is going to be engaged in that child's education over the next few weeks, let alone the parent who may not have known what was going on anyways with education.
Yeah.
Kimberly, thanks for your comment in the chat saying that, you know, her school has team meetings, room that they can call the hangout room where kids are able to connect with each other. And I think that's an awesome idea. We were talking about the water cooler. Remember earlier we talked, it was last week, we talked about, our friend Rebecca brought up there's no water cooler space, or actually we'd call it photocopier room.
Yeah.
Well, actually, maybe not now because now we don't make copies, but the reality is when we make copies, that's where we run into colleagues and talk and just, you know, how is it going? And so I think Kimberly's point of having like a hangout room for students.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
I love it. Too.
Okay, and as we finish out, you know, just your own self-care as much as possible. Keep to routines. Have a time to set things to say it can last until. You know, we did our first furlough Friday. I was super stressed out about it, but was able to put everything away, and, you know, it was fine. The world did not fall apart. I think, Chris, you said you had, you know, like 20 messages or emails. Or
I did. I had 20 emails.
But yeah, setting a schedule, planning a week at a time if all possible. That comes back to kind of thinking about those longer student-driven projects. You don't need to have assignments due all the time necessarily. And again, think about your own screen time. Chris,
I'm wearing, these are my, what do they call these blue light lens glasses?
The blue screen glasses.
From Amazon, because my eyes were falling out of my head. The first 2 weeks, we were pulling 15 hours a day.
Yeah.
And so my eyes were falling out of my head. So yes, this is helping my screen time. But yes, with screen time, just try not to be on there as often. And
I actually saw a friend that got some for her, I think her daughter's in kindergarten or something.
That's a good point.
So they were cute little pink glasses that were blue screen. So
love it.
So keep it simple, everyone. Plan those routines out, and we're hitting our limit here, Chris.
If you refresh the slide, I think I added the last one, which is just simply the OEN network, just as a place where if other people want to join in and find the other upcoming webinars. So yes, thanks 100 million thank yous for all of you who joined us. We've got people on YouTube, by the way, thank you so much, and some who've joined us on the live Zoom. That page is simply on the Oregon Education Network. And thanks for putting the bit.ly there, Nicole. There's other webinars. We're hosting 4 more this week, and I think we have 1 or 2 maybe next week, but the Department of Ed is also hosting, it's their space, and so they've been gracious enough to let us join in and post some of these webinars. And these are not our webinars for just us. These are for our teachers across the state. And so if you're like, hey, we'd love to share or join, absolutely feel free to reach out to us.
Yeah, so tomorrow we have some panelists, some teachers that are going to be sharing on these kind of 5 concepts of what has worked, what their fail forwards have been. It will be largely secondary tomorrow, math and sciences for the most part. And then we'll have an elementary one. And then we're also going to, which Chris, we need to work on that. We're going to be running kind of an interesting new topic where we're going to be forcing people to maybe reflect a little bit about what's happened with emergency remote learning and that transfer to next year. Even though we don't know yet, but you know, we found out LA Unified is officially going to be starting in the fall online, and the majority of the rest of California will likely kind of follow because that tends to be their pattern. And
hopefully this will all go away.
We don't know. I know districts are starting to have conversations about it, but we really don't know. So I think go ahead.
I was going to say, I think if I was going to take something away, I think I would take away the idea of transferring what I'm doing now. If I could tweak a few things between now and the end of the year, just to test run some things. And then the reality is this, and we talked about this today. The reality is if we go back to school in the fall and we're back to the normal classroom routine, would you continue to do things the way you did at the beginning of 2019? Or would you really try to move some of the things you've been doing now that have been working? And I think this whole idea, and Nicole's brought it up a few times, this transfer of like what I'm doing now that's working. Yeah, I actually kind of want to keep that up. So yeah. Anyways, 1,000 thank yous, friends, for joining us. Appreciate it. We'll be having a few more this week. I think if you want to jump on that Padlet, our Twitter handles are on the Padlet. But yeah, thank you so much for being here. And with that being said,
We'll
Yeah.
add some more things into the Padlet too, because I had a whole bunch of stuff and